What's up, gals? Thank you so much for being here with us again. Today we have an incredible speaker. His name's Roger Allen. He's a family life and parenting expert, business consultant, and a psychologist. He's helped organizations with their relationships and helped empower their employees for most of his career before turning over to being a parenting expert. Is that right, Roger?
Yes, that's correct. I spent the first 10 years of my career practicing psychology and then transitioned into full-time business consulting. And really, relationships are relationships. Some of the core values that I was teaching and skill sets that I was teaching with organizations are very similar to what we do within families. And so when I retired officially from my consulting, I did kind of come full circle back to the personal development, human development, parenting kind of material that has intrigued me and which I have loved for years.
I think all parents' hope is that it's never too late.
Yeah.
So if a parent feels like they have made a lot of mistakes in their parenting and their kid is basically grown up, they're getting older, what are some steps you would suggest for them to try and start over and repair that relationship?
Oh, good. Such a good question. You're talking about a child maybe who was left home or?
Just maybe some parents that feel like they made a lot of mistakes. Maybe they parented out of fear, almost the child's, whole upbringing, and they maybe feel like it's too late.
And don't we all parent out of fear,
Right.
I mean, so often. And so let's not be hard on ourselves because of that. Let's give ourselves some forgiveness and some acceptance and some love, because truly we were doing the best that we could at the time. But if I'm a parent in that situation, what I may want to do is own up. And maybe it's verbally, and maybe the first step isn't verbal. Maybe the first step is through a note or a little letter. But I'm going to own up and I'm going to say, hey, there's some ways in which I wasn't there for you as a parent, and I really want to apologize for that because I wasn't always trusting you. You're really a good person. You have the resourcefulness that you need inside to make good choices, good decisions in life, or whatever. I'm making stuff up, but I'm going to own up to my part. I have to tell you, I want to apologize for doing this, for not being a better listener. I want to apologize for grounding you forever. That wasn't very helpful. I want to apologize for yelling at you. I want to apologize for not trusting you and believing in you. I want to come from a different place. And it's really important to me today. I would love to have a good relationship with you, but only if it works for you. It's got to work for both of us. I hope that it would work for you. But I recognize I made some mistakes. I blew it. And I'm really sorry about that.
I love that. I think that's a great first step that shows a lot of humility. I've already grounded my 2-year-old for life, so I guess I better start over. I'm going to have to go ask for his forgiveness and start again. But
parenting is about making a mistake. And hopefully, here's the important thing, Lauren. Can we learn from those mistakes? Because doggone, if we're not going to make them, we're going to make plenty. Okay. Even when we resolve to do better, we're still going to make mistakes. That is okay. Our kids are resilient. And not only that, they have to grow up in a world in which, how do they learn resilience? And how do they learn to make good decisions? And how do they learn courage? And how do they learn if it's not in the face of opposition? And fortunately or unfortunately, some of that comes from their parents. It's just the way life is. God created us as imperfect people. That includes as imperfect parents.
Right.
But I think one thing that can be very helpful is parents. I've been talking about creating a safe place for your child, but maybe we need to create a safe place for ourselves. I think all of us as parents need, in order to have the soft heart that you were talking about just a moment ago, to be able to ask for forgiveness, we need to be able to find a safe place inside of ourselves, a stillness, a quietness, a calmness, a loving place, even a courageous place. And as parents go to that place, so that when hard things happen, we have some place that we can go to process. We need to process our feelings. We need to feel the negative feelings we have about our parenting. We need to look at the thinking that we're doing about our parenting that is causing us to react from fear instead of act out of trust and faith. And so I try to take a little devotional time every morning. And what I do is I try to find that stillness inside of me, that quietness. And, you know, it's hard when you're a parent because you're so busy.
Right.
But there are still things that we can do periodically to just breathe for a moment. You know, I'm getting caught up in the dynamic that's happening, and my temptation is to want to argue and fight with my child, or even step in and fix and make things all better so that I don't have to feel uncomfortable about the fact that this child is having a meltdown. Sometimes we need to pause and take a step back and find that place inside of ourselves where I can process my feelings, where I can process my thinking, so that I can make better choices that are trust and faith-based. Let me give you an example. Can I do that?
Please.
This is a friend of mine, and he shared this story. I asked if I could tell the story, but it illustrates how we have to fix ourselves first. I mean, fix is the wrong word. I'm sorry about that word. But parenting is about changing ourselves first. And he was an ecclesiastical leader, and he over a congregation. And he was sitting one night in his son's bedroom. His son was a teenager at the time, and they got into this vicious argument. And back and forth and back and forth. And his son was pushing so hard against him, and he was arguing, and, you know, tempers were flaring. And then his son said, "Dad, what I would like is to be able to talk to my pastor." And the father's first thought was, the first thing he said was, "Well, that's the best idea you've had all night." And he had another thought, and that thought was, "Oh, I am his pastor." And he said, "Give me just a minute." And so he got up off the bed and he walked out into the hallway, and he took a moment. And he shifted his psychology, right?
Right.
His feelings, his thinking. He had to do something to take upon himself that mantle of being this ecclesiastical leader for his son, not the parent. He walked back into the room and sat down on the bed and said, "Okay, you're now talking to your pastor. What is it that you want to say?" His son kept sharing, but he responded as he would to any of his other congregants. Is that a good word?
That sounded good to me. I knew what you meant, at least.
He came from a totally different place, and he said, "It was so hard for me because he was saying things that I didn't want to hear." And so he was saying things that I didn't want to hear. And that's our temptation when we see things happening or we hear things coming from our children that we don't want to hear. We just want to rush in with our solutions and our fixes and our advice and make everything all better, not trusting what is inherent inside of our children. But Jack said, so I just listened. I was a really good listener. And I let him talk, and I let him talk and pour out his heart. And he said at the end of that, the two of us stood and we embraced. And there was a tenderness and a love between us that I hadn't experienced with this boy in many, many years. It's about changing ourselves in order to be a good parent. And that means finding that quiet place inside of us, a stillness, a quietness. Some people invite God to join them in that place, a stillness, a quietness, a more loving, calm place, a courageous place where I can process what's going on in myself as a parent. I can look at my negative feelings and feel those feelings. If I'm going to help a parent change from fear-based thinking to faith-based thinking, I'm first going to have them tell me, what are all of your fear-based thoughts and your fear-based emotions? Let's get that out in the open first. And we can do that with ourselves if we create that safe haven, and allow ourselves to find that quietness and that stillness and that calmness. where, yeah, we can deal with our own negative emotions and then look at our negative thinking, but then shift it to something that's more positive and going to better serve our children in the long run.
Mm. Ooh, I love that. That resonates so true with me, finding that safe place within yourself, because sometimes you do have to do extreme changes, like your friend, that example of your friend, in the moment. And that can be difficult to do. I love that advice. Roger, one of my last questions for you is, what advice do you have for somebody whose spouse may not be on the same page as them when it comes to parenting in this manner?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'm not going to try to change my spouse. At least that's not going to be my starting point. John Gottman, one of the most, probably the best known marriage researcher in the world, says that 70% in marriage, 70% of our disagreements are unresolvable. And, that's a huge number. And what I'm suggesting, Lauren, is that we have to learn to live with some differences and disagreements. Right. Now, we can have a guideline, and the guideline can be, if you're disciplining, I won't intervene. If I'm disciplining, if I start the discipline, you don't intervene. In other words, let's agree to give some respect to one another. But to try to force one another, especially if it becomes all about force, it's not going to work. And so what do I want to do? I want to begin to make it okay inside of myself that my spouse parents in a little different way than me. Now I'm going to try to open up a conversation and say, hey, can we talk about this? But what happens is women tend to be the pursuers and men the withdrawers, right? So what happens is women see an issue and a need, and they approach their husband, and their husband thinks, oh, she's just trying to get me to be different and change me. And it just touches his inadequacy, and so he shuts down. Right. And to deal with this issue, I think we have to get beyond that dynamic. And so it may be very good for a mom, for a wife to say, hey, sometime I'd like to have a, conversation about our parenting. And I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts and how you view parenting and what works for you and what's right for you. And so I'm going to go into a listening mode because I really want to understand. I really want to create understanding. And then maybe I'm going to say, can I have an opportunity to share with you also what I think? But my purpose is to share different points of view, not force us too quickly to try to get resolution on this, because too often I've seen that just sets up a battle and resistance and resentment between spouses. So what I'm saying is I would use a softer approach. And then over time, maybe I can say, hey, can we maybe find a book or some resources and to study together and see if we can converge, or to what extent we can converge. But I'm not going to try to force it. And if my husband, no, I'm the man. If my wife, talking to moms, right? So I'm thinking like a mom.
Right.
So if my husband parents differently than me, I don't want to make that such a big issue that I'm going to alienate him. I want to respect him.
And that creates a lot more space. Yes.
Create more space. That's exactly right. Create more space and see if I can understand and communicate to him that I understand his philosophy of parenting. And then when he begins to feel heard about his philosophy of parenting, then I will say, can I share with you some of my thoughts about parenting? And is it possible for the two of us to converge? Or to what extent can we converge? But I'm going to make it okay in my own heart and in my own mind that it's not exactly the same. It's okay if there are some differences.
So very similar to how you parent. How you should parent is how you approach
your
spouse. Good
point.
As well.
Yeah, good observation. That's very, very true. Yes. It's giving space. It's respecting. It's respecting the autonomy. I think the problem that we can have as parents is we don't respect. And when I say we don't respect our kids, we don't trust our kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think even at a very young age, our kids can start to take a lot more responsibility for their lives than we're ready to allow them as parents. Right. We just get in and just try to remind and fix and, over control, over manage, instead of giving them the space and trusting, wow, there's a lot of goodness and there's a lot of capability and there's a lot of wholeness and everybody has a desire to succeed. Right. Our children want to succeed. And that natural motivation, what we want to do is unleash that natural motivation. And that comes so much from stepping back and trusting their autonomy, their responsibility, their agency. And that looks different for a 4-year-old than it does for an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old. Right. But understanding the principle that I'm talking about, I think is really, really critical. Understanding that we need to respect and start allowing them, yes, more space, and allowing them to be more self-governing than we typically do.
Such good stuff. Roger, if you had to say one takeaway that you want moms to really remember today, what would it be?
Parenting is hard. Parenting is hard. I remember when I got married and before I was a parent, I thought, oh man, I am the most patient person in the world. Well, it didn't take very long with these little critters, these little children who then grow up and, to realize, wow, I'm really quite imperfect, perfectly imperfect as a parent. I love that perfectly imperfect, by the way, because perfectly imperfect. It is so okay to be imperfect. And so that's one of the takeaways that it is okay to be imperfect, but let's learn. And I think such an important way we can learn is by finding that time for some stillness and some quietness, reflecting on what has happened, processing the negative emotion that I have, processing the negative thoughts that I have, and then shifting them as I do that. And but it begins with accepting, hey, it's okay for me to be an imperfect person. It's okay for me to be an imperfect parent. I just want to go to my safe haven. That would be the takeaway. Create a safe haven for yourself. A place where you can be safe inside yourself to process how you're doing as a parent, process your thoughts, process your feelings, and hopefully come out of that place, and you'll blow it when you come out. You blow it. But gradually over time, it will get better. The problem is when we think that perfection has to be tomorrow. And so I create a safe haven and, I do this really good work tonight and then tomorrow I blow it. Well, you're going to blow it tomorrow. Yeah. Look at it, take the long view. Look at it as a process and not as this perfectionism, I think, really gets in our way. You don't have to be a perfect parent. You won't be. I'm not. Far from it. I got into parenting because I saw my flaws as a parent. So anyway, that's what I would say. Create that safe place where you can go process what's happening, but also challenge that fear-based thinking and convert it into faith-based. I
love it. Improving in your parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. I love that. Yes. Roger Allen, family life and parenting expert, business consultant, and a psychologist. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. That was incredible information. Thank you again.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me. Bye.